Hello and welcome to the Tracking and Measuring the Opioid Epidemic as a Prevention Tool webinar series. The series is being brought to you by the collaborative effort of the North Carolina Division of Public Health Injury and Violence Prevention Branch and the UNC Injury Research. It is an extension of this past summer's North Carolina Overdose Summit, and specifically the Opioid and Prescription Drug Advisory Council, OPDAC, data, surveillance, and research teams, and many other partners that have contributed to this work. Today's presentation is the fifth since the Summer Overdose Summit and the last for 2017. I'm Scott Purcell, epidemiologist with the Division of Health. I'm the principal investigator of the North Carolina Violent Death Reporting System, the North Carolina Prescription Drug Overdose Project, and the new Enhanced State Opioid Overdose Surveillance CDC cooperative agreements. I'll be moderating today's discussion. That came about as a direct result of North Carolina Overdose Summit from June of this past year, as a follow-up to the data session where we had several great data partners on a panel discussing how their data was used and how it could be best utilized. Because the session had a panel that included more experts than time, we decided that we would host a series of webinars so that partners could have extended time so that they could provide additional details around their data source or system. Today, we're pleased to have Dr. Ruth Winecker from the Office of Chief Medical Examiner, OCME, within the Division of Public Health. Dr. Winecker is currently the Chief Toxicologist for the state of North Carolina. Corrections. Since 1999, the laboratory is responsible for records maintenance and review of analytical testing for more than 10,000 medical examiner cases per year. Dr. Winecker has published articles, book chapters, abstracts related to forensic toxicology, whose topics include analytic methodology, review of therapeutic and abused drugs, the toxicology of metals, and the measurement of therapeutic and abused drugs in alternative matrices. Additionally, she holds the academic position of Assistant Clinical Professor at the University of North Carolina School of Medicine, Department of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine. A member of the Society for Forensic Toxicologists since 1996, she served as President, Vice President, and Secretary and Director. Today's webinar will be about an hour long. We'll have about 5 minutes in between a segment, and so we can answer some questions around the halfway mark. We encourage viewers to submit questions as they come up in the Q&A box, which can be found on the top of your screen, or the chat box. Either one kind of works. The phone lines will not be open for audio questions. We also encourage you to chat amongst yourself or others, or contribute to the conversation within the chat box. And again, we'll try to post relevant information as we come across it. So be on the lookout for that, and you can just cut and paste it into a document or email. Again, these boxes can usually be found on the top of your screen. There's little icons that are the Q&A icon, and then a lot of times under more, the chat box will open up. Again, this is the fifth in a series of data webinars scheduled to occur the third Thursday of each month from noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in 2017. We're not planning a December webinar at this time and are hoping to survey participants about their data webinar needs for 2018. Based on that survey, we will see if webinars are scheduled for 2018 and on what topics. To find out more information about our presenters or future webinar topics, please visit the website listed currently in the chat box. Again, we will be recording and archiving this webinar. Please check the box later for an email with that link. Again, past presentations should be available as well. With that, let me turn it over to Dr. Winecker.
Hello, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here, and we will get started right away. So thank you, Scott, for your warm introduction. So I'm going to talk to you today about the medical examiner system in general, and also about the toxicology laboratory and its capabilities and what kind of data it produces. And also then I'll wrap it up with telling you what the office does with the toxicology reports. As Scott mentioned, we do all of the medical examiner cases in the state. So there's only one centralized laboratory. It's here in Raleigh. And so all of the pathology centers across the state and all the medical examiners in the field send their specimens to us for analysis. And this year we're going to top 12,000 cases. So that's just the beginning of that. And so to the OCME background itself, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner investigates all sudden unexpected deaths in North Carolina, including all suspected drug-related deaths. The OCME collects data from autopsy reports, death certificates, investigation reports, and toxicology reports on all deaths investigated by the medical examiner system in North Carolina. So, as you probably know, and the reason why you're probably here today, we have an overdose death problem. As you can see here in this slide, in 2010, accidental deaths due to overdose made up only 23% of all accidental deaths. But in 2016, the accidental deaths from drug overdose or poisoning was 35% of all accidental deaths. If you limit accidental opioid deaths to the number, you can see in 1999 we had about 2 accidental opioid deaths a week, but in 2016 it's almost 4 a day. And the types of drugs involved in these poisoning deaths, accidental poisoning deaths, has also changed over time. This is the top 5 drugs in poisoning deaths by year, going back to 2000. And as you can see, cocaine is a stand-in here. It's always in the top 5. But among the opioids, that has changed dramatically. Even back in 2000, ethanol was one of the top 5 drugs to have caused death. And you can see that methadone and oxycodone played the biggest role for the largest part of that, all the way up into 2011, and then things really began to change. You see heroin was number 5 way back when, and then fentanyl at that time showed up in 2004. Now this is pharmaceutical fentanyl, so this is fentanyl patches, Duragesic, that sort of thing. And then it moved up to number 4 in 2006, and 2011 and 2012. Again, this is circled in red. This is all pharmaceutical fentanyl and accidental drug overdoses for that. Heroin then disappeared during that time that fentanyl was going up, and then appeared again in the top 5 in 2012. And then quickly made it all the way up to number 1 in 2014 and 2015. And then dropped down to number 3 in 2016. The fentanyl that you see here in 2014, 2015, and in 2016, this is all illicitly manufactured fentanyl that was either added to heroin or substituted for heroin. And you also see here in 2016 the appearance of fentanyl analogs in the top 5 drugs causing death. So how did we get here? Well, fentanyl and its analogs are just the latest in a long string of compounds that have been introduced to the illicit drug market in the last 10 years. These are commonly referred to as either research chemicals or new or novel psychoactive substances. But these synthetic drug chemists have rediscovered old drugs from patents or modified existing drugs to change the structure so that they are exempt from current controlled substances scheduling. And they do this very rapidly. It's swift. There's new drugs being entered into the marketplace all the time. As soon as one analog of one of these compounds gets scheduled, then they'll start making a different one. Okay. Today, all drug classes are represented in the new compounds being sold online and in more traditional drug supply chains. So, just showing this is giving you the numbers of fentanyl and heroin, whereas before I was just talking about the top 5 drugs. But there's been an 1,100% increase in heroin-related deaths from 2010 to 2016. and a 35% increase just from 2015 to 2016. And then 32% of heroin-related deaths also involve fentanyl. So, like I mentioned before, fentanyl is either being substituted for heroin or mixed in with heroin in these cases. And, over time, you can see that the percent of opioid overdoses positive for heroin and also fentanyl and or fentanyl analogs has also dramatically increased. Toxicology laboratory do. Here, the American Board of Forensic Toxicology, which we have both internal, we have external examiners that come every 2 years, and then on the off year we have examiners doing paper examination of the laboratory score. Also, most testing is performed in-house, so we try to do everything unless it's not fiscally responsible to do it. So if there's a metals case, such as an arsenic poisoning or something, then we're going to send that testing out because it's not worth it to us to maintain an ICP-MS and spend money on that test for something that we're only going to do a couple of times a year. The other thing we do is sometimes we use reference laboratories when we have too much work. We're really lucky in that regard in order to have that resource, particularly this year, which has been very difficult. And you'll see in a little bit some of the testing increases that have happened here. But testing on the cases is based on case history and pathologist requests. So we focus mostly on cases that are suspected drug overdoses or whereby the analysis of drugs in the case is going to help the pathologist determine the manner of death in addition to the cause. So, so we do very limited toxicology on cases in which the cause of death is known and is unaffiliated with drugs, such as a gunshot wound or a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. So as mentioned before, the laboratory serves all 100 counties in North Carolina, and a certified toxicology report is issued to the pathologist. And case documents, including the toxicology reports, are sent to other requesters after all case procedures are complete. So it might be a while, even after the toxicology report is finished, before outside requesters have access to that and the autopsy report. So the scope of our work, it's pretty much really everything. So if, anything, unusual things like pine sol ingestions, we noticed that when the drug overdoses started increasing, we started seeing Imodium in our casework, and then we found out that people were abusing that drug. And then, even super unusual things like mothballs and whatnot. So it's really anything that someone could ingest to have caused their death toxicologically. So let me walk you through kind of how we do it. So we get cases in, and there's usually some history, okay? In this case, the decedent had a history of cocaine use and prescription pills, as well as making a special cocktail consisting of several over-the-counter liquid medications mixed together. So all reported to us was that on the day of death, she was drinking alcohol and used cocaine before collapsing to the floor, and has had overdoses in the past. All right, so this is the type of typical history we might get on a case. We're going to assign what we call an LCMS test, and also organic bases and ethanol pretty much automatically with any case that has a history like this. So first thing we do this test every single day. We do volatile screening because we do that on practically every single case we get in. And as you can see here, the ethanol is positive. So the history was that she was drinking, and sure enough, we found a positive alcohol. So 50 milligram per deciliter is equivalent to a 0.05 BAC. The next test we do is, we call it the LCMS test. So basically what we're looking for here is a targeted list of drugs. And it's at this time in early 2016, it was about 30 different compounds. Currently in 2017, we're at almost 70 compounds. So we're only looking for these particular drugs specifically. And in this case, we have a positive for alprazolam, cocaine metabolite, fentanyl, gabapentin, and plus or minus on the hydrocodone. Then the next test we're going to do, so like I mentioned, this is targeted. We're looking for this list of drugs specifically. The next test is an organic bases. Now, organic bases, most drugs are organic bases, and this is non-targeted, okay? So this is really anything that will extract by that extraction procedure and then could be detected by the GCMS or the GCMPD. In this particular case, we have also nicotine, caffeine, diphenhydramine, tramadol, levamisole, amitriptyline and its metabolite, fentanyl, and alprazolam. So you can see that some of these things that were on the targeted screen also are detected by this non-targeted screen. Now we use this test because it detects so many things, so probably over 500, but I can't give you an exact number because, again, it's non-targeted. And this is the test in which we most often find these new fentanyl analogs that are out there, okay? You can also see in here that there's some anhydrous methyl ester, which is produced when cocaine is smoked or burned. Also, it can be produced in injection port on GCMS, and as well as levamisole, which is a common cutting agent for cocaine. So far, we have the ethanol, which was positive, which generated a second test, the confirmation, ethanol confirmation. Off of the LC screen or the LCMS test, we had alprazolam, which generated a benzodiazepine confirmation, cocaine metabolite, which generated a cocaine confirmation, fentanyl, which generated a fentanyl confirmation, and gabapentin, which generated a gabapentin confirmation. And then off the organic basis screen, we had diphenhydramine, which generated a cough-cold confirmation, tramadol and amitriptyline, which generated an organic basis quant confirmation. So from this single case, 3 screening tests generated 7 confirmatory tests. And this is pretty typical of our casework. So, you know, we don't get one case, one drug positive. It's almost always one case, multiple drugs positive, which results in multiple confirmations. So there's the effect on the laboratory. So in addition to the increase in the number of overdoses, the index of suspicion is also increased in any death that at one time might have been okay to suspect that it was a natural death due to cardiovascular disease or whatnot. But so we're predicting that we're going to hit 3,600 full toxicology cases in 2017. When you look back all the way back to 1999, we only did 668. And again, talking about the number of confirmation or effect on the laboratory. So this is just comparing the first quarter of 2016 to 2017. You can see on that LCMS test, the increase is 8.3%. But the number of opiate tests have increased 61%. The number of fentanyl tests, 49%. And then for the analogs, the fentanyl analogs, it's a 350% increase. Whereas methadone tests have resulted in about the same number. And then the number of tests generated per positive screening results. So we just walked through that in that one case, showing how many tests. So we've gone from 1.7 tests generated per positive screening result to 2.7, so an increase of 59%. So, like I mentioned before, we have our targeted screening technique, which we're up to almost 70 compounds at this point, and then we have our non-targeted. And that's primarily where we discover these new compounds that we didn't even know we were looking for. And we're talking about these, you know, new or novel substances seen by the laboratory. And they basically cover all the different types of prescription medications that you can get now, or illicit medications. So synthetic cannabinoids, commonly referred to as spice or K2. These compounds mimic the effect of marijuana. Cathinones or piperazines. These drugs, you might have heard them called bath salts or flakka. These mimic the effects of methamphetamine and ecstasy. Anxiolytics. These are primarily the same as your classical benzodiazepines like alprazolam or Xanax, but they're newer novel compounds that aren't necessarily on the controlled substances list. We've seen new hallucinogens, and then of course the most deadly of the group are the synthetic opioids. So this group of compounds, again, mimics the effect of morphine, oxycodone, and other common prescription opioids. And some are similar in chemical structure to, say, fentanyl, so like the fentanyl analogs, while others are more novel, like the U compound. As you can see over time, too, the number of new or novel psychoactive substances detected by the OCD per year. We have the opioids, which really, the new or novel psychoactive substances really started showing up in 2012, and then dramatically increasing through 2016 and 2017. The stimulants, on the other hand, were really, really high. We had 11 compounds in 2012 that we detected, and then only just a few, like 2 in 2017 so far. And then this is anything else that we detect, hallucinogens or really anything else. And we have a couple of new compounds that are coming out that we just found out about. So if you don't know what you're looking for, sometimes you might miss something. So we've got this great panels that we do here in the laboratory, but sometimes there's things out there that are never going to be detected by those things. Here's 2 examples. This is a 24-year-old research chemical enthusiast, and some of these folks, that's what they call themselves. They research all these new chemicals or old chemicals that are now newly available, and they research their effects. They're kind of amateur pharmacologists. And, they'll just order them online because they're not controlled at all. And in this case, we found just a little bit of alcohol and a little bit of the designer benzodiazepine etizolam, and then we were stuck, and it wasn't enough to have caused a death. And you really shouldn't be dying at 24 years old unless you have some kind of, very severe medical problem, and this young person did not, or you have a drug overdose. So we went back to the scene and found, these 2 drugs, tianeptine and phenibut. And it turns out that phenibut has very similar chemical structure to pregabalin and gabapentin, so it probably has some anti-anxiety or anxiolytic effects. And then the tianeptine actually acts at the mu-opioid receptor. So here's this drug that nobody knew about that acts at the mu-opioid receptor. And so this case was found out as a tianeptine alcohol and benzodiazepine overdose. But neither one of these compounds were detectable by our traditional methods. So that just goes to show you that having a good scene investigation, getting references from the scene or physical evidence from the scene can be very important to the laboratory for figuring out what went wrong in a case. Another good example of this is I think this was about the 3rd fentanyl analog that the laboratory had detected. Now, this is kind of show you the challenge of that, how long it can actually take to get from a death to actually signing out a toxicology report, particularly with one of these new compounds. The last one we just talked about with the tianeptine and phenibut took almost a year. And this one took almost a year as well. So a 20-year-old female, our traditional toxicology only detected 4-AMPP. It's also known as disproportional fentanyl. So we knew that we had a fentanyl analog in this case, but we didn't detect any other peaks in our organic basic screen. We finally obtained the powder from the dust scene and analyzed it, and we found a large peak without a library database match. So, that kind of puts us in a bind, but we are chemists, and so we were tentatively able to identify it as furanol fentanyl by using the ion trap technique to get a molecular weight, and then also to look at the breakdown in the GCMS to figure out what the different pieces of the molecule might be. So we were left with, basically the tentative identification. So this group right here, this is the backbone of fentanyl. And so this is 4-AMPP. We find 4-AMPP as kind of a contaminant or byproduct in a lot of these fentanyl analogs. So that right away will tell us that we have a fentanyl in the case, or one of the fentanylogs, we like to call them. And then this is furanol fentanyl. So you can see that this extra group here at the top is what makes it furanol fentanyl. But it wasn't until March of 2016 that there was a certified reference material even available that we could purchase. And only once we got that in were we able to do method development and validation. And then the toxicology report for this case, this death that occurred in September of 2015, wasn't even certified until June of 2016. So I think we said we were going to stop and see if there were any questions about halfway through.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Winecker. This is Scott. So folks out on the line, it looks like we have a good sized group, about 45, 50 or so. If you have questions, again, the way to post them is to use the chat box or the Q&A box. And, if we don't have any now, then please be planning for some of the future ones. And we'll just take a second to see if we get a couple posted. And if not, we'll kind of continue on. So let's go ahead and move on for the moment. And if a couple pop up while you're talking, I might interject and see if we can answer them, or again, we can wait till the end.
That's fine. So, there's only about 9 more slides. So.
Okay, great, perfect.
Okay. All right. So because of this, we changed what we're doing. In 2010, like I said, we only had, a certain number of compounds that we were looking for with our targeted screen. In 2016, that number that got even bigger. We change this all the time. By the end of 2016, we were looking for carfentanil, probably the most notorious of the fentanyl analogs. And then earlier this year, we added all the rest of these on the far right hand part of the page here. And so, in addition, these are all fentanyls listed here for new drugs. And when I made this slide, we were actually planning to do these, but we've actually done them. But in addition to that, we added the phenibut and the tianeptine, and we've had 5 more cases that have that tianeptine in there. So, we try to stay ahead. Other ways in which we stay ahead is to look at drug forums to see what they're talking about. THS fentanyl was a good example of that. We had an unknown peak in our organic basis screen, and we knew that it was a fentanyl just based on looking at its structure, but it didn't match anything in the library. But by going out and looking around in those chat groups, you can find out, a possibility of what people might be using. So some of the things that we can do in partners with law enforcement is they can submit physical evidence in some of these cases to us, so that if we are coming up negative in a case, then we can then look and see, you know, is there a spoon with some residue on it, a syringe, is there any powders, whatnot. I think we helped out with a county that had a number of overdoses in a week, just a big spike in them, and we got that case in and was able to analyze it and tell them what was going on with that. So looking at all the fentanyl analogs that we have detected, one or more, and confirmed, you can see that back in 2014 was our first fentanyl analog. That was acetylfentanyl. And we continue to see those occasionally, not very often, but you know, in the 3 years that we've been looking for it, we've had 63 cases. Fentanyl was the big one. We ended up having 469 cases positive for that particular fentanyl. Butyryl fentanyl is, we had an initial case, a single case in 2015 and none at all in 2016, and then all of a sudden this fall it started popping back up again. So, you know, sometimes we'll get a drug and we'll spend, you know, 200 hours developing and validating a method, and then we'll only get 3 cases or we'll only get 1 case. So it's very labor intensive what we're doing here in the laboratory. So the most popular ones right now is the methoxyacetylfentanyl and cyclopropylfentanyl. We had our first methoxyacetyl in April of 2017, and then quickly followed by the cyclopropylfentanyl in May. And you might have heard about in Georgia where there were some fake or what we call mimic tablets of oxycodone that actually contained this cyclopropylfentanyl. And also, you might have heard about gray death. And gray death was, you know, drug dealers reuse names. So gray death was originally had carfentanil in it, but then it morphed into having U47700 and the cyclopropylfentanyl in it. So there is a question.
Yeah, you want to go ahead and answer it, or you know, you can reread it, or I can tell you. I mean, it basically is, please discuss why you think cocaine was the #1 drug of overdose in 2016.
Yes, we are finding some exhibits. So we don't analyze a whole lot of exhibits from the death scene. Most of the time our toxicology testing gives us everything we need. But there are cases of which people think they're buying cocaine, but what they're instead buying is a fentanyl analog, or the cocaine is mixed with a fentanyl analog. We had a number of cases in December of 2014 which 3 people died and like 11 people were sent to the hospital. Somebody was selling what they thought was cocaine, and it turned out to be acetylfentanyl. And we have seen some exhibits in which the cocaine has some of these fentanyl analogs in it as well.
It looks like another question is popping up. Do you look for or investigate any metabolites of the fentanyls, or are you looking only at the parent compounds?
So we're not monitoring for norfentanyl, but 4-AMPP is known to be a very minor metabolite of fentanyl, but it's actually a major metabolite of furanylfentanyl and probably methoxyacetylfentanyl. So there are some metabolites. So we don't do a lot of urine testing, and so you know, that's where you know, metabolites of drugs is going to be, you know, you really need to be looking for metabolites in urine, so we don't do a lot of that. So we use primarily in blood. We do our testing in blood because what's in the blood is what the brain is experiencing, and urine is really more of a historical specimen. So. All right.
Yep, I think we're good. There's no other currently posted, but again, to the folks on the line, you know, make sure you use either the Q&A box or the chat box, and it seems like Dr. Winecker maybe has a handful of slides left. We'll let her go through those, and then we'll kind of open it up for broader questions.
Okay, well, this next slide walks right into a little bit of what we were just talking about and the whole idea of co-intoxication. So, you know, in 31 cases of methoxyacetyl, we have many more than that now, but this was from September or so. You know, we have ethanol was a common intoxicating substance, so was cocaine. And methamphetamine is very prominent these days in our casework and has actually increased dramatically. We're seeing a lot of cases that have these fentanyl analogs plus or fentanyl, heroin plus methamphetamine, and we never used to see that before. So it's, you know, really a new, you know, a new horizon out there for us. And like I mentioned before, the number of confirmations has jumped dramatically in the laboratory because the number of compounds we're seeing in these cases has also jumped dramatically. So it's also not common to see not only a fentanyl analog, but also fentanyl or a second fentanyl analog, or maybe one of the U compounds in these cases as well. So it's pretty common. And as you can see, the negative for all other compounds but methoxyacetyl, fentanyl is only one case. So we only had one case that was negative for all other co-intoxicants. Same thing for cyclopropylfentanyl. So you can see fentanyl is pretty much the most common co-intoxicant, but you know, methamphetamine is up there. It's pretty big. Cocaine, again, is up there. You know, very, very common to find cocaine or methamphetamine along with these compounds as well. And same thing, it's, you know, pretty common to find, if you find one fentanyl analog, you're going to find one or more other fentanyl analogs or fentanyl in these cases. So getting, and I'm going to wrap up here about what makes the OCME data kind of unique. So the toxicology lab, in addition to a report, each case is going to get a worksheet. And this worksheet allows the pathologist to attribute the drug to the death in the following ways. They can say that the drug at that concentration could have caused the death independently of all other drugs and substances. And this is something you just can't get from death certificate data, okay? Or that the drug was acting in an additive manner, and at that concentration was capable of only causing death in combination with other drugs or substances. So, or the drug acted in a contributory manner. And we use this pretty much exclusively for, say, behavioral effects such as ethanol in a motor vehicle crash. All right, so just kind of wrapping up here, last couple of slides. Opiates have a high abuse potential. We know this already. There's an increase in cases positive for designer opioids. I didn't mention tolerance, but you know, we always keep that in mind when we're interpreting a toxicology case, particularly if it's prescription narcotics or prescription opioids. But you know, even in some of these cases, it's always in the back of our mind about the tolerance of the individual to these compounds. Co-ingestion of other CNS active drugs is very likely in all of these cases, and it's not uncommon to detect 2 or more opioids in a single case. The lab does the best job when we know what we're looking for, but we do have strategies for when we don't. And so when we can get physical evidence from the scene, that can help us. But again, we can work out what a compound may be by the various techniques we do have in the laboratory. And then we can then order reference material to verify that what we suspect is true is actually true or not. The laboratory, in addition to issuing these toxicology reports, does offer interpretations to pathologists and other interested parties. So we do have an open door policy, open email, open phone call policy. So we're happy to answer any questions about our toxicology reports. And then the office is available for data requests of any kind. Any of these fentanyl analogs, any of these combinations of drugs, and how the drugs. We can give you information about what percentage of cases where benzodiazepines seem to be additive with the opioid in the death. So we can give you that kind of information as well. It's very granular, and so very useful information that's quite different from what you get from a death certificate. But that's it.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Winecker. That was really fantastic, and lots of good information there. I know people are really appreciative of it. We do have a couple of questions posted at the moment, and so let me read those to you, and then we can again open it up to the group at large. The first one is, I may have missed this. How long are these substances or metabolites generally recoverable? Is there a certain amount of time at which the point the test is no longer sensitive?
So we do have cases, we call them delayed death cases. Every effort is made to get the first available hospital draw in those cases. If not available, then, as long as we can get a urine that was drawn within a day or two of admission to the hospital, then we can look there for these compounds. So again, we have various strategies that are specific to the case and circumstances of the case. But fentanyls, these fentanyl analogs have half-lives that are pretty much similar to fentanyl. So, and that half-life is significantly longer than naloxone. And you've seen that already in the number of naloxone doses administered to individuals as well. So I would say, and once the death occurs, the drug is present. We're not worried about the loss of the drug after death. There's no evidence right now that any of these compounds are not stable in whole blood. So we're not worried about that.
Great. Next question. Have you generated any maps or graphics to depict the regional variation in specific drugs? I imagine the toxicology from Wilmington or Western North Carolina looks quite different from the Triangle area. Are there reports or data that can be reviewed?
So Allison Miller is our epidemiologist, and she is working on some maps to give that. We get the data requests obviously from media outlets as well, and so we can generate, again, as granular as you want it to be. We like to stop at county level data, but we can go down further than that as well. But we know that carfentanil was most of the deaths from carfentanil occurred around Mecklenburg, and less at the coast and less in Western. So we have looked at that.
Great. There's a couple of questions. Well, there's a similar question along these lines. Does your office use graphical or spatial analysis in collaboration with other states or federal agencies to help identify new or rare substances?
So I wouldn't say graphical analysis to help identify new or novel substances, but anytime I get a new one, even if I'm not exactly sure what it is, I'm already sending an email to the folks at the DEA and a couple of other colleagues that I am in contact with all the time at some of the crime labs and whatnot, and mostly to say, have you seen the very same thing that we think we're seeing? And if you have, where did you get your reference standard?
Yeah, no, that's really important. There's a bit of a follow-up for the disaggregated data question. Any data disaggregated by race or class would be appreciated. Again, that might be best for Allison Miller and some of her work. And again, there's a data request location, but if you want to comment on it, that's fine too.
Yeah. So, you know, Allison looks at all of that. You know, it's just specific as like what requests are you and what question are you trying to answer. So she can do that. If you go to our website, which is dhhs.ocme, that you can download a data request form and send it in to Allison, and she will work on that. She's working on our annual report right now, so she's very busy, but she's happy to do all of that kind of work.
And we'll post that in the chat box. I think Eva is going to try to do that. Here's another question kind of along the same lines. The reports posted on the website are really helpful. Thanks for trying to get that information out. The fentanyl and heroin report that's up there now says that 2016 data is provisional and current as of April 11, 2017. When do you expect 2016 data to be final or ready to share? Do you have plans for posting any additional resources?
Yes, there are plans for posting additional resources. Like I mentioned, she's working on some mapping graphics and other reports. We're pretty much finished with 2016 at this point. I don't know that there's any actually outstanding toxicology cases. I don't think we're working on any of those. So, but she is currently, like I said, working on her annual report, and so those other reports are, you know, a little bit on hold.
Great. And just, I think it's worth reemphasizing, you know, that workload shift. You know, you were mentioning in 1999, you know, less than 700 cases, and now in 2017, you're on target for 3,600 cases. And, you know, unfortunately, I know that the resources haven't been keeping up with the workload case, but I wanted to make a mention that, you know, I feel really fortunate, and whenever we're at meetings or anywhere else, people say how, you know, jealous they are of North Carolina because we have Dr. Winecker and Dr. Radish, who are really leading the effort in our state around these things. And so, you know, we're well positioned, even though these things are fast moving and changing all the time. And Dr. Winecker, I just don't know if you wanted to make a little bit of a mention around some of the, you know, in the last General Assembly session, there was some work around synthetic opioids in the Controlled Substance Act. Do you want to mention some of the changes that took place there?
Well, well, even at the federal level, there's some work around that, and you know, our data was instrumental in you know, not just our data, but your data as well, particularly the emergency department data, but was instrumental in working towards getting, you know, the STOP Act and some of these other acts. I think at the federal level, they're just going to basically say if it's an analog of fentanyl and it's got that that backbone structure, that 4-AMPP, they're going to schedule it. So we've found over the years, though, that when they do something like that, then the drug chemists, the illicit drug chemists, they just move on to something else. They'll move on to the U compounds, which don't look structurally at all like fentanyl. So, you know, that's probably what's going to happen.
You also mentioned earlier, there's no current questions, by the way. So if you do have other questions, again, please post them. There is a quick shout out from the Carolina Poison Control Center, and Dr. Bueller says, thanks so much, very enlightening, and thanks for your dedication and work on this issue. You mentioned earlier some of the gabapentin involved deaths, and I know that you and Allison have worked on some of those. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about some of that work and some of the things you might be seeing there?
So gabapentin is pretty much present in a large percentage of the prescription opioid deaths, and it's very similar in structure to pregabalin, which is a controlled substance. And pregabalin was studied when the clinical trials for pregabalin were done. It was studied in the pain, the chronic pain population. But gabapentin never was. And in that study of the pregabalin, in the chronic pain patients, they noticed a tendency for abuse. And so that's why it was scheduled. And I think it's like a Schedule 5. It's not, really high in the scheduling. The gabapentin was never studied that way, but it's a very similar compound, acts in the brain in the same way. And it's not controlled. And we see it in a large percentage of our opioid overdoses. So we were working on that. It's Kentucky that actually, at the state level, decided to control gabapentin. And so they reached out to us and asking about our data. And we did a study with them. And we've submitted a manuscript, basically. But so it may be that gabapentin gets scheduled as well because of the work that we've done.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much. Looks like maybe one other question at the moment, and then if there are others, again, please post them. Is the OCME looking into any of the circumstances of these deaths to address risk factors?
So excuse me, lots of data is collected from these deaths. We collect, data about does the person have a history of drug overdose, or previous drug overdose, or abusing drugs, or that sort of thing. So that was actually a data point that's collected along with the other characteristics of the case, including the race and gender and age and whatnot. So there can be some broad associations, between that kind of information.
Great. So I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment. Again, we've posted the OCME data request website on the chat box for those who want to take note of that. With that, it looks like we're getting close to the hour, so let me just try to wrap a few things up. Again, I want to thank you all for attending the 5th webinar in this series around tracking and measuring the opioid epidemic as a prevention tool. I want to remind you that the webinar has been recorded and will be made available to you. Past webinars will be posted there as well. We're currently not planning to have a December webinar, and we are seeking your help to see if these webinars have been valuable and whether we should plan and schedule them into 2018. So please be on the lookout for a survey related to that. Basically, we're going to do a quick assessment, try to make sure we understand the folks who are coming to these. We had a pretty big number register, and people, I think, because we had 5 of them, they kind of were between many of them. So we want to make sure we're hitting the target audience and making sure we're hitting their needs. Again, if you want to find out more about these presentations or future ones, you can visit the website, which we'll post. And again, thank you, Dr. Winecker, for your presentation today. That was really great. And again, thanks to the rest of you and all the hard work you do to prevent overdoses in North Carolina. And with that, we'll end today's webinar. Thank you very much.